Hi everyone, and welcome to the third of my free paint along demos in soft pastel. If you enjoy this, please do hit the subscribe button and go check out all of my other free content here on YouTube. I also have a Patreon channel where you'll find my full catalogue of tutorials and lots more. But I hope you enjoy this video. Today's demo is going to be of this lovely goat. And I'm going to aim to have it done within around 2 hours. I may go a little over. I'm going to leave the photo reference on the screen here for you if you want to either trace from your computer screen or use a grid to draw it out. I'll also upload a full resolution version of this on my Patreon channel with gridded versions, etc. But let's take you through the materials that you'll need to work along. You can see that I've got my background already worked. I'm also going to release a full tutorial on this on my Patreon channel, but the piece itself is 10 inches square and I'm working on the sanded colour velour pastel paper. I'll add links to all of the materials I use in the description below. So like with my last paint along demo of the sleeping dog, I'm going to limit myself to just my Unison 36 animal set. And you can see I've just laid them all out here in their order, just to make life simple. But I've also used some other colours in my background so far, so I'll maybe try and incorporate some of those within the goat as well, just to tie in some of the colours from the background, create some colour harmony. Also, I've got laid out a few Faber Castell Pastel pencils. I'm sure I'll need a few of those for some of the wispier hairs and details. So let's make a start. And I'm going to try and work as quickly as possible and not add too much detail so that I have some hope of finishing this within about 2 hours. So the first thing I'm going to do is a major block in, and you can see on the goat that he's got a lot of black on him, so although I'm not going to leave it jet black, I'm going to take this Faber Castell black and do a bit of blocking in just to see where we are in terms of light and shade. So this part will take a little while. I'll continue right around the goat looking for all of the darkest tones. And I can lean quite heavily with the Faber Castell in some places because this stick is a little bit harder than the Unisons that I use. It leaves plenty of tooth on the paper for later on when I come to add some colour on top of the black areas. But for now, I just want to start to block in some of that depth and contrast that I'm going to need later on. So he's really dark down the front. And I chose this photo because of the lovely shadow being cast across his face, and also because it's a nice demonstration of how to create light and shade, something I'm always talking about in my tutorials. And half the battle sometimes is choosing a good photo reference that really tests that or lets you show that effect. So look for photo references that are obviously high resolution, so you've got lots of detail, but more importantly that the lighting is nice. So when I'm working on velour, I'm constantly going back and giving all of my marks a little rub into the paper. And you can see even in my blocking in stage, in some of the areas that aren't jet black, I am roughly trying to follow the grain of the fur even at this early stage. So just roughing it in, and then in the areas that really are a lot darker, like this dark shadow across the muzzle, just being a little more heavy-handed in those areas. So this part will take a little while, but it's a really good way when you've got a lot of dark fur on an animal, just to quickly block in without blocking in using a flat colour. I like to use parts of my blocking in to already create some texture in this first layer. So it gives me the direction of the marks that I need to make later on with my soft pastels. Helps me sort of map out the face a little better. So you can see I'm just starting to curve my marks, coming around the side of the nose here, how it changes direction. Just changing the direction of my marks to try and bring it around that curve and down the side of the face. So I'm not just solidly blocking in these areas, because we can see quite a lot of highlight colours with black underneath. So I just want to really create the texture in some areas. And again, this dark shadow just continues up the side of the face, over to this ear. And it really is quite dark in there, so I'm more or less just shading this area in. So now looking for other dark areas, just under the ear, anywhere that really stands out as darkly contrasted to the rest. So it's almost like a tonal underpainting in a way. And I especially like this technique when it's a black animal or a black subject, just to take the first step to block in all of that lovely dark contrast. It really helps you see the rest of your values quite easily. So just give that a nice smudge into the paper. I don't mind if it moves around a little bit. It helps fill in some of the other gaps. So it's quite dark here under the chin. As we come down towards the beard. And this area here, the whole mouth area, really glows in the photo reference. So I want to make the contrast in under the chin nice and dark to help that effect. So I really can do a lot of my initial mapping out and some tonal work here before I even start to lift any colour. So just shaping the chin and the outline of the mouth here. Again, it's really dark behind there, which is going to help the face really pop out from the body behind. And just using this black to shape right up as far as I can see. And then we're into finer wispy hairs. Now I will spend a lot of time working on the edges using some pastel pencil as well. And this is why I like to do my background work first. As you can see, when I flick the hairs out over the background, you can still see the background through the hairs, so it really does sit on top and it brings your subject matter into focus more. So pay particular attention to edges always. So it really is extremely dark in here. I'm just using the edge of the pastel more. And as I said, I'll come back and work more on these edges. But for now I'm just speeding on, trying to get as much blocked in as possible. And then I'll be able to work the picture more overall, and hopefully that might help me work a little bit faster too. So this area is really dark in the photo reference. What I'll do later on, if I have time to add more detail to the body, I'll lighten the photo reference a little bit in that area and have a look at just what the fur is doing in there, what directions it's going. But for now I will just block this area in pretty roughly. Again, looking for where it comes down to on the body, because that again is going to give us the effect of light and shade where the shadows are. So that's roughly the shape of the shadow. And his lovely beard. Do love goats. They've got really expressive faces. And I'm really looking forward to tackling that lovely eye, big glassy eyeball. So only focusing on the very darkest areas so far. And I will need to come back and darken some of these areas even more as I progress. So you will see me pick up this black Faber Castell again. I use it quite a lot. It's great for getting very precise dark lines just where you need them. So it's not quite so dark over here. The light is coming from the left of the goat, but there's still some little creases in here. And you can see that I can lean heavily with the Faber Castell, or I can also lean quite lightly and sort of sketch things out a little bit. I'm really using this stage of the painting to plot more of the fur and start to give it some depth. Although this side of the face is being hit by light, so there's really not a lot of solid black over here, but in between all of the highlight colors you can still see very dark lines, so I need to add those in now so that when I come in with the highlight colors I aim to leave some of this black showing through. So as always, I'm trying to work from dark to light. So if it's fur that you're painting, try and look in between the lightest marks that you can see. And whatever the dark colour in there is, try and add that first. And that's what I'm usually doing when I'm painting any kind of fur, trying to look in between the highlight colours and lay down those dark colours first. In this case with a black animal, that's why we're working with a lot of black to get us going. So I'm not being too fussy about it at this stage. Just a rough direction of the fur is enough. So when working on features like this, I'm constantly looking over it at the photo reference, just measuring up everything, making sure I've got my proportions correct. When you're working on a 3/4 angle face like this, it's really important that you get the angle of the nostrils just right, as that side of the nose recedes around the face. So it's usually that sort of thing that can let a 3/4 angle portrait down a little. Another area, of course, is the second eye, which sometimes you can just see a little peep of it, like we can in this case. So just finishing off blocking in some of the darker areas, and then I'll get on to some colour work. So that's about enough with the black for now. I'm going to make a start on the ears, which is somewhere that I often start with, just to get an idea of the colours that I'm using. They're also usually sticking out from the top of the head, so quite naturally I want to start from the top of the painting and work my way down. So ears are usually at the top of animal portraits anyway. So one of the lovely fleshy purples from the animal Unison set. This is BE23. And it's got to be one of my most used colours. So not quite as much warmth in the ear over here. I just want to add a little hint of it on the inside there. So one of my favourites, lovely dusky grey 8. Trying to find some of the shadow areas on the ears, mostly around the edges or the insides. So continuing a little more with this lovely purple shade, which is actually a brown earth 23, and I make use of it in a lot of my work, even in amongst the black fur that I've already laid down. I can start bringing in little touches of warmth using this colour. But it's a really useful colour, especially for around the warm tones that you find on ears, inside ears, also on noses. So just really preparing the ears for some lighter tones. And as soon as I bring in that outline, that bright sunlit outline on the ears, they're going to start to pop out from the background. So it really does go quite dark right in the center of this ear. So just picking up some lovely, again, it's very warm, brown earth 6. But now already I'm going to pick up a little slither of white, and you can see that my fingers are a bit dirty, so the white doesn't stay white very long. I'll start to work around the edges of this ear. And although it's very early to come in with a highlight colour, sometimes when the highlight colour is the edge of something, it helps me just to get this value in quite early so that I can see where my brightest places need to be. So you'll often see me go for the darks first, but I may then start to add in some bright highlighted areas just to get a feel for the overall contrast from darkest right through to brightest, and then I can start to more clearly see all of the values in between, hopefully. So especially when it's a real contrasted sunlit subject like this, it helps early on, I find, just to get some of these highlights in. So as I said before, the light's coming from this side of the goat, so much of our highlighting in white will happen on this side. So just trying to drag some of these little hairs out over the background. Again, I'll neaten that up more with some pastel pencil. But for now, just starting to block in some of the more solid white areas. And the same over on the other ear, this lovely section here that's catching the light. And I'm just using a small piece of pastel so that I can at least try to get my edges nice and soft, flicking the pastel out to create those little hairy edges. So quite a lot can be done with just the soft pastel. Without any detail from the pencil, you can still get the effect of the fur just using the sticks. So this shadow just cuts along the ear here. It's those lovely shadow lines that are going to create that light and shade effect. So already, just by adding in those highlights, we're starting to see some of the 3D effect. So A4, I'll be bringing in some lovely lilac tones as well as blues. Anything which is going to help that lovely reflected light and the glow. So just starting to pick out the white area on the other side of the face. But of course, because we're in the shadows over here, that white isn't going to be quite white. So I'm going to come in with some of the blue colour from the sky. As a lot of that might be reflected on the white areas. Also using some of my really dark purple in the animal set, tapering some of those little hairs back into this white area. But really focusing on lilacs and blues for this area of what we know to be white, but we have to bear in mind that we're completely in the shadows over here, so white is never what it seems. So it's all about looking at the colours you can really see and not what you think you should see. And that just takes a little while to get the hang of. I certainly struggled with this at the start, but it's one of those things that's really worth persevering with, as it brings a lot of extra scope to your work. If you can play with colour values and enhance perhaps what you can see in photo reference. And just along the back of this ear, just catching the light, little flicks of hair running up this ear. So ears are always deceivingly tricky. I always end up spending quite a long time on ears. But part of the thing is I'm figuring out what colours I need to use to get the effect of the fur. And then quite often I can progress with the rest of the piece a little more fluently because I've already figured out what colours I need in my palette. And it is actually quite lovely to work with a limited palette for a change. I've managed to build up a good collection of Unisons, but sometimes it's perhaps distracting or overwhelming to have so many colours to choose from. So it is quite pleasant to just have the animal set here. Limiting your colour choices isn't always a bad thing. So just starting to think about how some of those little hairs come down, trying to find an edge on the pastel. And again, I can help these areas a bit later with some pastel pencil. Some of the finer details. So again on the other ear, just searching for any of those lovely little reflected blue areas. And onto this area around the eye. We've got a patch here where there are some dark hairs showing through just above the eye. And quite a dark shadow that runs right across the eye itself. And then of course it's really dark in here just next to the ear. So once you start to get some colours dropped in, it becomes a bit easier to see where you need to go extra dark. So again, let's come in with some of the white to shape this white patch just above the eye. And again, anytime I'm applying the softer pastel on the paper, you'll see me come back in and give it a good rub into the paper. You don't want a lot of soft pastel sitting loose on velour. You really want to rub in all of your layers. Try not to be too heavy-handed with the pastel. So just mapping how far down this sunlight comes and when we're into the shadow area. And then of course my colours for the highlights within the shadow area need to be different. But at the same time trying to continue on the direction of the fur from sunlight into shadow. So you don't want those two areas of shadow and sunlight to look like completely separate blocks of fur, because in our mind we know that they're entirely white. It's just that the shadow is being cast across it, so You want it to still look like one area of fur. Just searching for edges on the bigger pastel sticks. You can see from this broken piece that I've got quite a lot of nice edge to work with, whilst the other side gives me more blunt shapes to work with. So don't be afraid to break your pastels up. You can use them right down to the last crumb, so they won't go to waste. Again, trying to hint at some of the hairs inside the ear. Again, using my A4, a nice light lilac. So avoid using your white inside the ear, save it for that area around the sunlit edge. So just try to get out of the habit of seeing white as a way to lighten things. Try and use other colours, other tints for your lighter values, and really save up your white for where it'll have its full impact. So I'm being very loose with this at the moment. If I have time, I'll come back and do more to refine and add more detail to each area, but I'm always mindful of this clock in these demos. I'd like to make it something that you can create a finished piece in an afternoon, rather than the usual laborious techniques that I use on my commissioned work or my gallery paintings. So of course I normally take a lot more time than this, but it is fun to set yourself more of a time limit and see what you can produce. So perhaps where I want to be a little neater with my edges, I can start to take some pastel pencil and just soften these edges into the background a little. Really just dragging some of my white pigment out over the paper. And the reason I start doing edges as soon as this over here is just because I'm still able to lean on this area without destroying too much of what I've done. So I use that opportunity to start working some of the edges at the top of the piece at least. So just some little bits of light catching the dark hairs along the top. Less as we come around this corner into the shadow. And I can also use the black to start and create some of those nice fine hairs along the top of the head. So once you've got some pastel on the paper, you'll find that especially with the dark colours, you can come back in with the pastel pencil and really tweak things into place. So I'm never too worried if I get it onto the paper very accurately with the soft pastel, because I can always come in and do this. So just softening those edges as I go. So each little edge where it overlaps something else will get worked in this way. So just giving a little bit more thought now to the direction of the fur up the front of the goat's face. Trying to see how that sweeps off and how it meets this white area here. What does that edge look like? So let's start adding a bit more colour down the front of the black area. And the colour doesn't really go much over into this side. We really are in the shadows over here, but certainly this area is picking up a lot of reflected colours and a lot of little sparkly highlights. Similarly down below the eye here on this side of the cheek, also picking up a lot of colour. I'll even bring in some RE18 just to start and add some of the really warm red tones we can see in some of the black areas. You often find this in black animals, that once the sunlight hits them, they're not actually black at all. They've got loads of colours on them. So just dotting some of this throughout the cheek area, which will shine through my next layers. So just before coming in with too many more highlight colours, I just want to make sure that I've gone dark enough in all of the really dark places down the front of the face. It's much harder to add these dark colours in after you've got your nice light colours on, so don't be afraid to go darker than you think at first. As long as you're using a good pastel paper that accepts many layers, you'll be able to put your light colours on top. Just turning the pastel around as I need to make those little marks fan out around the top of the nose. So for some areas those darkest marks aren't quite black, and this deep purple colour is a great tone. For example, on the very nose itself, all these little dark marks, not quite as dark as purple. And then I also want to bring some of this purple up through the black that I've already put down. So just constantly looking at the photo reference, looking at the direction of the fur, trying to pick out any of these colours. Once you start looking in really closely at fur, especially when you've got a good high resolution image, there really are so many colours to see in there. And once you start playing more with colour, the more and more colour you start to see. And that's how you get addicted to buying pastels. You never have too many colours. So really anywhere that the black fur is being hit by sunlight, try to look for little flecks of other colour that you can add in there. All of that is going to help when you start to add the highlights, to keep it from going really flat. So I can see so many little touches of warmth throughout those darker areas.